The conference room aboard diplomatic station Harmony was designed to make visitors feel small. The ceiling stretched upward for 30 meters, covered in living crystal that pulsed with soft blue light. The table at the center could seat 100 beings of various sizes and shapes. The air carried a faint smell of flowers that did not exist on Earth. Ambassador Yellen Okonkwo sat alone on the human side of the table. She was 63 years old, with gray hair cut short and eyes that had seen too many negotiations fail. Her simple black suit looked plain compared to the elaborate robes and armor worn by the 12 delegates facing her. The galactic hegemony had ruled known space for 40,000 years. 12 elder species, each one ancient and powerful, had joined together long before humans learned to make fire. They controlled trade routes, set laws, and decided which younger species would be allowed to grow and which would be contained. Humanity had drawn their attention. High Speaker Morath 7 rose from his seat. He was crystalline, his body made of living mineral that caught the light and scattered it into rainbows. When he spoke, his voice sounded like glass wind chimes in a storm. The hegemony has reached a decision regarding the human question, he announced. Your species has expanded beyond acceptable limits. In the past 2 centuries, you have colonized 47 worlds. You have built a fleet of warships. You have made contact with 17 species without hegemony approval. Yellen kept her face calm. She had expected something like this. Humanity's rapid growth had made the elder species nervous. We meant no offense, she said carefully. Earth was eager to join the galactic community. We simply wished to. You wished to take what was not yours, interrupted Kethvari Prime, the leader of the insectoid delegation. Her compound eyes reflected Yellen's image 1,000 times. Her mandibles clicked with each word. You spread like a disease. You consume resources meant for established civilizations. You breed without control. The other delegates made sounds of agreement. The serpentine voss hissed. The massive Grundar rumbled like distant thunder. The ethereal whisper kind flickered in and out of visible light. Yellen waited for them to finish. What does the hegemony propose? She asked. Morath 7's crystal body brightened. You have 60 planetary rotations to comply with the following terms. First, you will surrender all colonies beyond your home system. Second, you will dismantle your defense fleet, keeping only vessels approved by hegemony inspectors. Third, you will accept protectorate status under hegemony oversight. Your expansion will be controlled. Your breeding will be monitored. Your development will proceed only as we allow. The words hung in the air like poison. Yellen felt her heart beating faster, but she did not let it show on her face. She had trained for moments like this. She knew that showing anger would only make things worse. And if we refuse? She asked quietly. Kethvari Prime made a sound that might have been laughter. Ambassador, we have studied your military capabilities. You possess approximately 300 warships. The largest is a light cruiser barely 100 years old. Your weapons technology is primitive by our standards. Your shields would fail against our weakest vessels. She leaned forward, her antennae twitching with amusement. The hegemony fleet numbers 18,000 warships. Our smallest destroyer could eliminate your entire navy in a single engagement. Refusal is not a realistic option. It is simply suicide with extra steps. Yellen looked around the table at the faces of the elder species. She saw contempt in some, pity in others, and cold calculation in the rest. They had already decided humanity's fate. This meeting was not a negotiation. It was a notification. I will need to consult with my government, she said finally. 60 rotations is not much time for such a significant decision. It is more time than you deserve, Morath 7 replied. The hegemony is being generous. We could have simply taken what we wanted. Remember that, Ambassador. We are offering you survival. Many species have not received such an offer. The meeting ended shortly after. The delegates filed out, already discussing other matters, having dismissed humanity from their thoughts. To them, this was a minor administrative matter. A young species needed to be put in its place. It happened regularly throughout galactic history. Yellen remained seated until the room was empty. Then she allowed herself one deep breath, one moment of fear and anger and frustration. She thought about Earth, about the billions of people who had no idea their future had just been decided by beings who saw them as insects. Then she straightened her shoulders and activated her private communication device. The message she sent used a frequency that the hegemony could not detect. Humanity had developed it in secret, one of many small advantages they had carefully hidden from galactic observation. The encryption was based on quantum patterns that would appear as random noise to anyone. Without the proper key, the message was short, only 3 words. Wake the sleepers. She did not know exactly what those words would set in motion. Like most humans, she knew only fragments of the truth, stories passed down through generations that seemed more like mythology than history. But she knew that her grandmother had whispered those words to her mother, and her mother had whispered them to her, and she understood that they were meant for a moment exactly like this. Somewhere, somehow, humanity had prepared for this day. Yellen left the conference room and walked to the observation deck. Through the massive windows, she could see the hegemony fleet that had escorted the delegates to the station. 50 warships, each one larger than anything humanity had ever built, hung in space like sleeping predators. Their hulls were covered in weapons that could crack planets. Their shields could withstand anything in the human arsenal. She watched them for a long time. A young aide approached her nervously. His name was David, and he had been with the diplomatic corps for only 2 years. He still believed that words and reason could solve any problem. Ambassador, the hegemony delegates have returned to their ships. They're requesting confirmation that you understood their terms. I understood them perfectly, Yellen said without turning from the window. What will we do? We can't actually fight them. The numbers are impossible. Even if we had 10 times our current fleet, we couldn't, David. Yellen finally turned to look at him. Her eyes were calm, almost peaceful. Do you know why humanity was able to colonize 47 worlds in just 2 centuries? He blinked, confused by the question. Because we're determined? Because we had to expand to survive? Because we already knew where to go? She smiled slightly. Every colony we established was built on a site that our scouts found remarkably suitable. Perfect atmospheres, abundant resources, no hostile native life. Almost as if someone had prepared those worlds for us long ago. David stared at her. I don't understand. Neither did I, for most of my life. But my family has carried a secret for generations, David. A secret that we were forbidden to speak of until the proper time. She looked back out at the hegemony ships. I believe the proper time has finally arrived, on Earth. In a secure facility beneath the African continent, a small group of people received the ambassador's message. They were old families, their lineages stretching back thousands of years. They had married carefully, kept records secretly, and passed down knowledge that the rest of humanity had forgotten. They called themselves the Keepers. Their leader was a woman named Adaora Obi. She was also the president of the United Earth Government, a position her family had held more often than statistics should have allowed. She read the ambassador's message 3 times, then closed her eyes and recited words she had memorized as a child. The forgetting ends. The sleeping wake. The children remember what the parents chose to forget. Round her, the other keepers bowed their heads. Some wept, some smiled. All of them felt the weight of history pressing down on their shoulders. It's time, Adaora said. Contact Admiral Chen. Tell her to open the archive. On Luna, deep beneath the gray surface, systems that had been dormant for 62,000 years began to activate. Power flowed through circuits made of materials that human science had supposedly not yet discovered. Lights flickered on in corridors that no living human had ever walked. Computers booted up, their memories intact despite the passage of millennia. Admiral Chen Weilin descended into the archive using an elevator that dropped for nearly 30 minutes. She was 70 years old, a career military officer who had spent her life commanding the small, secret fleet that protected these installations. She had always known this day might come. She had trained for it, planned for it, feared it. Now it was here. The elevator doors opened onto a chamber so vast that she could not see the far walls. The ceiling was lost in darkness high above, and filling the chamber, row after row after row, were pods the size of buildings. Each pod contained a ship, not the small, primitive vessels that humanity showed to the galaxy. These were something else entirely. These were warships from an age when humanity had ruled the stars. when the species that now called themselves the hegemony had been primitives living in caves and oceans and volcanic vents. Chen walked to the nearest pod and placed her hand on its surface. The material was warm, almost alive. Text appeared on its surface, glowing with soft golden light. V. Admiral Chen Weilin stood at the edge of the observation platform and looked down into the abyss. The archive stretched below her for kilometers, a vertical shaft carved into the heart of Luna itself. The walls were lined with pods, each one containing a sleeping warship, each one waiting for the command to awaken. The scale of it made her feel like an insect. "Admiral, the resurrection protocols are ready to begin." Her aide, Lieutenant Commander Yuki Tanaka, stood at attention nearby. Her voice was steady, but Chen could see the fear in her eyes. They had both grown up with the secret, trained their whole lives for this moment. But nothing could truly prepare a person for what they were about to do. "How many ships in this facility alone?" Chen asked. 17,412, Admiral, ranging from destroyer class to the world-ship memory of Earth. Chen nodded slowly. And this was just one of 7 archives scattered throughout the solar system. The total number of vessels hidden beneath moons and inside asteroids was staggering. "Begin the awakening," she ordered. "Start with the smaller vessels. We'll bring the capital ships online last." Tanaka hesitated. "Admiral, may I ask a question?" "Speak freely. Why did we hide? I know the stories, the legends about the forgetting, but I've never truly understood. If our ancestors had all this power, why did they give it up? Why did they pretend to be primitives for 60,000 years? Chen was quiet for a long moment. When she spoke, her voice was heavy with the weight of generations. Because they were ashamed, she turned away from the abyss and walked toward the command center. A massive circular room filled with consoles and displays that hummed with awakening power. Tanaka followed, waiting for more explanation. "The first expansion was not a peaceful time," Chen continued. "Our ancestors spread across the galaxy with a hunger that could not be satisfied. They colonized thousands of worlds. They encountered hundreds of species. And when those species refused to submit to human rule," she stopped at the main console and began entering command codes. "They destroyed them, completely, totally. They wiped civilizations from existence. They erased entire species from the history of the universe. They committed genocide on a scale that you cannot imagine." Tanaka's face went pale. "The elder species of the hegemony were not always elder," Chen said. "Once they were primitives, just emerging from their evolutionary cradles. The only reason they survived is because our ancestors never got around to conquering their corner of the galaxy. The first expansion ended before it could reach them." "How did it end?" Chen's fingers paused over the console. "There are records in the archive. I have read some of them. Our ancestors encountered something in the deep void between galaxies, something that forced them to retreat, something that made them realize what they had become." She shook her head. "The records are incomplete. Much was deliberately destroyed. But the result is clear. The survivors chose to forget. They dismantled their civilization, buried their weapons, and returned to Earth to start over. They believed that humanity needed to evolve differently, to grow without the memory of what they had done. And the keepers? The keepers were left to guard the archive, to watch over the sleeping fleet, to remember the truth so that if humanity ever faced extinction, they could choose to remember as well." Chen activated the console, and the first resurrection commands went out. "We were never supposed to use these ships for conquest. We were supposed to use them only for survival." Deep in the archive, pods began to open. Preservation fields that had held for millennia flickered and died. Hulls that had been cold for 60,000 years began to warm. Systems checked themselves, ran diagnostics, and reported ready for operation. The destroyer Righteous Fury was the first to complete its awakening. It was 3 kilometers long, a dagger of dark metal covered in weapon ports and sensor rays. By the standards of the ancient humans who had built it, it was a small ship, barely worth noticing. By the standards of the modern hegemony, it was larger than anything in their fleet except their largest dreadnoughts. And it was just the beginning. Across Luna, across the asteroid belt, across the moons of Jupiter and Saturn, and the frozen bodies beyond, the fleet awakened. Ships that had witnessed the rise and fall of empires. Ships that had fought in wars that modern civilization had never heard of. Ships that carried weapons capable of destroying stars. Chen monitored the progress from the command center. Each awakening vessel appeared on her display as a green light, a point of power joining a constellation that grew larger by the minute. "Admiral," Tanaka said, her voice barely above a whisper, "the memory of Earth is coming online." Chen felt a chill run down her spine. The memory of Earth was not just a ship. It was a world ship, a mobile planet, a vessel so large that it generated its own gravity. It was 600 kilometers in diameter, capable of supporting billions of lives indefinitely. It had been the flagship of the first expansion, the throne from which the Emperor of Mankind had commanded his genocidal conquests. It was also the most powerful weapon humanity had ever built. "Show me," Chen ordered. The display shifted to show the world ship. It was hidden inside a hollowed-out asteroid at the edge of the solar system, a rock that astronomers had dismissed as unremarkable. But inside, the world ship was waking from its long sleep. Lights appeared across its surface like stars being born. Power readings climbed beyond anything the modern sensors could properly measure. "Estimated time to full activation?" Chen asked. 47 hours, Admiral. The world ship requires more time due to its size and complexity. That's still within the hegemony's deadline. Good. Chen turned to address the other officers in the command center. "I want all vessels at full readiness within 30 hours. Begin recruiting crews from the regular fleet. Use the training protocols in the archive databases. The systems will feel familiar to anyone with military experience. Our ancestors designed them that way." The officers acknowledged their orders and began working. Chen watched them, thinking about what they were about to do. These young men and women had trained their whole lives without knowing the truth. Now they would be given command of vessels that could reshape the galaxy. She hoped they were ready. She hoped humanity had learned enough during the forgetting to use this power wisely. A communication signal interrupted her thoughts. It was a direct line from Earth, encrypted with protocols that predated the hegemony by 40,000 years. "Admiral Chen," said the voice of President Adaora Obi, "I'm calling to inform you that the Council of Keepers has reached a decision. I'm listening. Madam President, we will not use the fleet for preemptive attack. When the hegemony comes, we will defend ourselves, but we will not become what our ancestors were. The weapons of the archive are tools of last resort, not instruments of conquest." Chen felt relief wash over her. This was the answer she had hoped for. "Understood, Madam President. The fleet will be positioned defensively. There's more. The Council has also decided that it's time for the truth to be revealed, not just to the hegemony, but to our own people. The forgetting has served its purpose. Humanity needs to remember now, so they can choose their own path forward." This was more complicated. Chen understood the necessity, but she also feared the reaction. Billions of people were about to learn that everything they knew about their history was a lie, that their ancestors had been monsters, that the peaceful civilization they had built was founded on amnesia and shame. "How will you tell them?" she asked. "I will address the planet directly. I will show them the records. I will let them see what we were and what we chose to become." The president's voice was heavy with responsibility. "They deserve to know, Admiral. They deserve to choose for themselves whether this is a legacy they want to reclaim. And if they choose conquest, if they see the power we have and decide to use it as our ancestors did." There was a long pause before the president answered. "Then we will have learned that the forgetting was not enough, that 60,000 years of peace could not change what we truly are." Her voice hardened. "But I don't believe that, Admiral. I believe we have grown. I believe we are capable of being more than our worst impulses. This is the test that will prove it, one way or another." The communication ended, and Chen stood alone with her thoughts. Around her, the command center hummed with activity as humanity's ancient fleet continued to awaken. Soon, the galaxy would see what humanity had been hiding. She prayed they would also see what humanity had become. On Earth, in cities and villages and space stations across the solar system, people gathered around screens as President Obi began her address. They expected news about the hegemony ultimatum, perhaps a plan for negotiation or a call for unity in the face of external pressure. They did not expect the truth. "My fellow humans," The president began, her face calm, but her eyes showing the weight of what she was about to reveal. "I must tell you something that will change everything you think you know about who we are and where we came from. It is a truth that has been hidden for 62,000 years. It is a truth that our ancestors chose to forget. But the time for forgetting is over." And then she told them. She told them about the first expansion, about the empire that had spanned a quarter of the galaxy. She told them about the wars and the conquests and the genocide. She told them about Commander Thesic of the Moroth stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Crystal Vengeance, and watched his fleet assemble. 12,000 warships had answered the hegemony's call, gathering at the border of human space like wolves preparing to descend on sheep. Their hulls gleamed with power. Their weapons hummed with barely contained destruction. Their crews were eager for the glory that would come from teaching the upstart humans their place. Thesic himself was eager for nothing. He was old, even by Moroth standards, his crystalline body clouded with age and experience. He had commanded fleets for 3,000 years. He had conquered 17 species and absorbed for others into the hegemony's embrace. He had seen young civilizations rise and fall, their ambitions crushed beneath the weight of galactic order. But something about this mission made him uneasy. "High Commander," reported his tactical officer, a young Moroth whose crystals still rang with bright enthusiasm, "all vessels are in position. We await your order to proceed. What is the status of the human fleet?" Thesic asked. "Unchanged, sir. 300 vessels, mostly patrol craft and light cruisers, clustered around their homeworld. No significant movement since our ultimatum." That was what troubled Thesic. Any species facing annihilation would panic. They would attempt diplomacy, try to build alliances, strengthen their defenses. But the humans had done none of these things. Their ambassador continued to ask for extensions, making polite requests that everyone knew would be denied. Their military made no preparations for war. Their population seemed remarkably calm. It was as if they knew something the hegemony did not. "Send scouts ahead," Thesic ordered. "I want detailed scans of the human system before we enter. Look for anything unusual." The scouts departed. Small, fast ships that could slip into a system and report back before anyone noticed their presence. They would reach human space in a few hours, providing Thesic with intelligence that would either confirm his fears or prove them groundless. He hoped for the latter but prepared for the former. On the bridge of the memory of Earth, Admiral Chen Wei-Lin watched the hegemony scouts enter the solar system. They were skilled, she had to admit. Their approach was careful, their sensor profiles minimized, their paths designed to avoid detection by conventional means. But human sensors were not conventional. "Track them but do not engage," she ordered. "Let them see what they came to see." Her executive officer, Captain Marcus Stone, looked up from his console with confusion. "Admiral, if we let them report back, the hegemony will know about our fleet. They'll know we've been hiding our strength. That's exactly what I want." Chen had thought long and hard about how to handle this moment. She could have destroyed the scouts, keeping the secret hidden until the hegemony fleet entered weapons range. She could have revealed herself with a devastating first strike that would have crippled the enemy before they knew what was happening. But that was the old way, the way of the ancestors who had drowned the galaxy in blood. Chen was determined to find a different path. "We want them to know," she explained. "We want them to see our strength and have time to think about what it means. If we surprise them, they might react with fear and aggression. If we give them time to understand, they might choose differently. And if they don't, if they attack anyway." Chen's face hardened. "Then we will do what we must, but we will give them every chance to walk away. We owe that to ourselves, if not to them." The scouts completed their scans and fled back toward the hegemony fleet, their sensors burning with impossible data. Chen watched them go and felt the weight of the coming hours pressing down on her shoulders. High Commander Thesic was in his private quarters when the scout commander requested an urgent audience. He granted it immediately, knowing that the fear in the commander's voice meant nothing good. The young Moroth who entered was shaking so badly that his crystals made a constant ringing sound. His sensors had recorded everything, and he had watched the data with growing disbelief as his ship retreated from human space. "Report," Thesic commanded. "High Commander," the scout commander tried to compose himself. I don't know how to describe what we found. The data speaks for itself. He transferred his recordings to Thesik's personal display. The High Commander watched in silence as images flowed across the screen. Ships, not hundreds, but tens of thousands. They emerged from asteroids and moons, from hidden bases beneath planetary surfaces, from locations that the hegemony's finest cartographers had marked as empty. They ranged in size from destroyers that dwarfed hegemony dreadnoughts to carriers that made entire battle groups look like toys. And at the center of it all, visible only as a massive shadow against the stars, was something that defied comprehension. "What is that?" Thesik whispered. "The humans call it the memory of Earth, High Commander. It's a world ship, 600 kilometers in diameter. Our sensors couldn't get complete readings because the power signatures were beyond our measurement capabilities." Thesik stared at the image. In 3,000 years of warfare, he had never seen anything like it. Nothing in the hegemony's arsenal came close to this scale. Nothing in galactic history suggested that such a vessel was even possible. "How old are these ships?" he asked. "That's the part I don't understand, sir. According to our dating analysis, the youngest vessel in that fleet is over 60,000 years old. Most are significantly older than that. 60,000 years. The hegemony had existed for 40,000 years, and they had thought themselves the eldest of powers. But these ships had been ancient when the first hegemony species had begun to develop civilization." "High Commander," the scout commander said quietly, "our weapons cannot penetrate their shields. Our shields cannot withstand their weapons. I ran the calculations multiple times to be certain. If we attack, we will not win. We will not even come close to winning. They will destroy our fleet without suffering a single casualty." Thesik sat in silence for a long time. His entire career had been built on the certainty of hegemony supremacy. Every battle, every conquest, every subjugation had reinforced the simple truth that the elder species were mightier than all others. They had the right to rule because they had the power to enforce their rule. Now that certainty was shattered. "Does the Hegemony Council know about this?" he asked. "I sent a report immediately, sir. They are convening an emergency session." Thesik nodded slowly. He looked again at the image of the world ship, that impossible mountain of metal and power floating silently in space, and he felt something he had not experienced in centuries: fear. The emergency session of the Hegemony Council was chaotic. 12 elder species, accustomed to agreement and unified purpose, found themselves in complete disarray. The crystal halls of the council chamber echoed with shouts, accusations, and desperate attempts to understand what had gone wrong. "This is impossible," declared Kethvari Prime, her mandibles clicking furiously. "Humans are a young species. They developed spaceflight barely 3 centuries ago. They cannot have ancient warships. The scout data must be falsified. The data has been verified by 3 independent analysis teams," replied the Voss representative, her serpentine body coiling with anxiety. "The ships are real. They are ancient, and they are more powerful than anything we possess. Then where did they come from? How did humans acquire technology that predates our civilization?" The chamber fell silent. No one had an answer. It was the whisper kind who finally spoke, their ethereal voice drifting through the room like morning mist. "There are gaps in the historical record, periods where our ancestors recorded strange events, unexplained phenomena, civilizations that rose and fell before any of us existed. We assumed these were myths. Perhaps they were memories. Are you suggesting," Morith 7 said slowly, "that humans are not new to the galaxy? That they are an ancient species that somehow disappeared? I am suggesting that we know less than we thought, and that our assumptions about human weakness may have been dangerously wrong." The council debated for hours, but no consensus emerged. Some wanted to retreat immediately, to abandon the ultimatum and pretend it had never happened. Others insisted that showing weakness would undermine everything the hegemony had built, that they must maintain their position regardless of the odds. In the end, they reached a compromise that satisfied no one. High Commander Thesik would proceed to human space as planned, but he would attempt negotiation before any military action. The hegemony would not surrender its ultimatum, but it would explore whether some accommodation could be reached. It was, Thesik knew, a decision born of fear and confusion. The council was hoping he would find a way out of the trap they had created. They were hoping the humans would give them an excuse to back down without losing face. He was not optimistic. The hegemony fleet entered human space on the 49th day of the 60-day ultimatum. They emerged from hyperspace at the designated coordinates, their weapons charged and their shields raised, expecting to intimidate a primitive species into submission. What they found stopped them in their tracks. The human fleet was waiting. Not. The standoff lasted 72 hours. 12,000 hegemony warships faced 47,000 human vessels. Across a gap of empty space that felt like an ocean of tension. Neither side moved. Neither side spoke. The commanders on both sides waited, watched, and wondered what would come next. High Commander Thesic spent those hours reading. The records that Admiral Chen had transmitted were vast beyond comprehension, spanning tens of thousands of years of history that the galaxy had forgotten. He read about the first expansion, about human fleets that had darkened the skies of conquered worlds. He read about species that had been erased from existence, their names preserved only in human archives. He read about the wars and the victories and the terrible pride that had driven humanity to believe they had the right to rule everything. And then he read about the forgetting. The decision had been made by the last emperor of mankind, a man named David Chen, whose descendants would eventually include the admiral, now commanding the human fleet. He had looked at what his species had become and felt a shame so deep that it broke something inside him. The empire was already crumbling, damaged by an encounter with something in the void between galaxies that the records did not fully describe. But it was the shame that drove the final choice. Humanity would return to Earth. They would bury their weapons, erase their memories, and start over as primitives. They would give themselves a second chance to grow without the weight of their crimes. And perhaps, in 60,000 years or 100,000 years or however long it took, they would become something worthy of the power they possessed. Thesic put down the data pad and stared at the ceiling of his quarters. He had conquered species. He had imposed hegemony rule on civilizations that had resisted. He had always believed this was right, that order required strength and strength required dominance. But the humans had possessed strength beyond anything Thesic could imagine. They had ruled a quarter of the galaxy. They had crushed all opposition, and they had looked at what that made them and decided they would rather forget everything than continue being monsters. He did not know how to process this. A knock came at his door. His aide, a young Morith named Crystalline 7, entered with obvious reluctance. High Commander, the Hegemony Council is demanding an update. They want to know why we haven't attacked. Because we would lose, sir. The Council is aware of the tactical situation, but they believe that backing down without a fight would destroy the Hegemony's authority. Other species would see our weakness. The Galactic Order would collapse. Thesic laughed, a sound like breaking glass. The Galactic Order. We built that order on the assumption that we were the mightiest power in existence. That assumption was wrong. The order was always a lie, Crystalline 7. We just didn't know it. The aide was silent, uncertain how to respond to such heresy from his commanding officer. Tell the Council that I am in negotiations with the human commander. Tell them that a peaceful resolution may be possible. And tell them that if they order me to attack, I will refuse and accept whatever punishment they see fit to impose, sir. That would be treason. Yes, it would. Thesic stood and walked to the viewport that showed the impossible human fleet. But I have read their history, Crystalline 7. I have seen what they were and what they chose to become. They had the power to enslave the galaxy, and they gave it up because they were ashamed of themselves. I will not be the commander who forces them to remember why they should be ashamed. On the memory of Earth, Admiral Chen received word that Thesic had requested a personal meeting. She agreed immediately, suggesting neutral ground aboard Diplomatic Station Harmony, where this crisis had begun. President Obi contacted her shortly after. The Council of Keepers is concerned, the president said. If Thesic is planning treachery, you would be vulnerable on that station. He's not planning treachery. I've been watching the communications traffic from his fleet. His officers are confused, scared, and looking to him for guidance. Some are demanding attack, but most are just waiting to be told what to do. Thesic is the key to this. If I can convince him, the rest will follow. And if you can't, Chen was quiet for a moment. Then we'll have to fight, and we'll win. But I don't want to win that way, Madam President. I don't want to prove that the forgetting was pointless, that we're still the same monsters we were 60,000 years ago. Neither do I. The President's voice was heavy with the weight of her responsibility. Go to the meeting, Admiral. Do whatever you need to do. The future of two civilizations depends on what happens in that room. Chen arrived at Diplomatic Station Harmony with a small escort of guards, who were more ceremonial than practical. If Vesic wanted to kill her, there was nothing they could do to stop him. But she didn't believe he would. Something in his voice during their brief communication had suggested a being wrestling with difficult thoughts, not one planning violence. The conference room was the same one where Ambassador Okonkwo had received the ultimatum that started this crisis. Chen entered to find Vesic already seated, his crystalline body dim with exhaustion. He had clearly not slept since receiving her historical transmission. "High Commander," she said, taking a seat across from him. "Admiral." He looked at her with eyes that reflected her image like shattered mirrors. "I have read your records. I understand now why you hid, why you forgot. But I don't understand why you're telling us this. Why reveal your strength? Why not simply destroy us and take our place as rulers of the galaxy? Because we don't want to rule the galaxy. We did that once. It didn't go well. Then what do you want?" Chen leaned back in her chair and considered her answer carefully. This moment would shape everything that came after. The words she chose would determine whether the galaxy moved toward peace or war, cooperation or destruction. "We want to exist," she said finally. "Not as conquerors, not as subjects, but as equals. We want to trade with other species, share knowledge, learn from each other. We want to be part of the galactic community without being forced to dominate it. The hegemony will never accept humans as equals. The elder species have ruled for 40,000 years. They will not share power with anyone. They might, if they understand that the alternative is not war, but obsolescence." Chen pulled up a display on the table between them. "Our technology is 60,000 years more advanced than anything in the hegemony. Our ships are more powerful, our weapons more devastating, our knowledge more complete. We could give that to you." Vesic stared at her. "Give it to us? Share it, freely, not as tribute or trade goods, but as gifts between friends." She met his eyes steadily. "We have spent 60,000 years learning to be better than our ancestors. Part of being better means helping others instead of conquering them. We have medical technology that could extend your lives by centuries. We have energy systems that could end resource scarcity in the hegemony. We have knowledge of the universe that would take your scientists millennia to discover on their own. And you would give this away, without demanding anything in return? We would ask for one thing: peace. A commitment from the hegemony to work with us instead of against us. A recognition that the old way of doing things, the way of ultimatums and subjugation, doesn't work anymore." Vesic was silent for a long time. His crystal body flickered with colors that Chen couldn't interpret. Internal processes that might have been thought or emotion or something entirely alien. "The Council will resist," he said finally. "Kethvari Prime and others have built their power on the assumption of hegemony supremacy. They will not accept being made equal to a species they tried to conquer. Then they will have to be convinced, or replaced, or simply outlived as the galaxy moves forward without them. You speak of revolution. I speak of evolution. The galaxy has been stagnant for 40,000 years. High Commander, the same species in charge, the same structures of power, the same assumptions about who matters and who doesn't. We're offering a chance to change that. Not through war, but through choice." Chen stood and walked to the viewport that looked out on the stars. "Our ancestors made terrible choices. They used their power for domination and destruction. We have a chance to make different choices, to use our power for healing and growth. That's what the forgetting was about. That's why we hid for 60,000 years. We were waiting until we were ready to be better. And are you ready?" "I don't know." She turned to face him. "That's the honest answer. We've spent 60,000 years trying to become worthy of this power. But there's no way to know if we succeeded until we actually use it. This moment, right now, is the test. Are we capable of offering friendship instead of conquest? Can we look at a species that threatened us and see potential allies instead of enemies?" She walked back to the table and sat down across from him again. "You asked me what we want, High Commander. The truth is, we want to find out if the forgetting worked. We want to know if 60,000 years was enough to change who we are. And we're hoping that by showing mercy to the hegemony, by offering partnership instead of punishment, we can prove to ourselves that we've finally become the species we wanted to be. Vesic looked at her for a long time. Then, slowly, the colors in his crystal body began to brighten. It was, Chen realized, the Morith equivalent of a smile. You are asked Hegemony Council Chamber had never seen a session like this one. The 12 elder species sat in their traditional positions, their representatives arranged according to ancient protocols that had governed galactic politics for 40,000 years. But the weight of history pressed down on them differently now. The certainties they had built their civilization upon had crumbled in a matter of days. High Commander Vesic stood at the center of the chamber, facing the beings who controlled the most powerful alliance in known space. He had spent his entire career serving these masters, carrying out their will across the stars. Now he was about to ask them to change everything. The human fleet remains in defensive position. He reported, they have made no aggressive moves despite possessing overwhelming superiority. Admiral Chen has transmitted a formal offer of partnership, including the sharing of advanced technology and medical knowledge. She asks only that we recognize humans as equals and commit to peaceful cooperation. Kethvari Prime's mandibles clicked with anger. Recognize them as equals. They are children. Their civilization is barely 3 centuries old. We do not negotiate with inferiors. We manage them with respect. Speaker, that assessment is no longer accurate. Vesic activated a display showing the human fleet. These vessels are older than our recorded history. The humans did not acquire this technology. They built it 60,000 years ago, when our ancestors were still learning to use tools. Then they lied to us. They pretended to be weak while hiding their strength. This is treachery, and it should be punished, should it? The voice came from the whisper-kind representative, their ethereal form flickering at the edge of visibility. They hid their strength because they were ashamed of how they had used it. They chose weakness over tyranny. Is that not something we should respect rather than condemn? The chamber erupted in argument. Morith 7 called for calm, but his crystal voice was drowned out by the hissing of the Voss, the rumbling of the Grundar, the clicking of the Kethvari. Each species had its own perspective, its own fears, its own calculation of advantage and disadvantage. Vesic waited for the noise to subside, then spoke again. I have read their history. All of it. The wars they fought, the species they destroyed, the empire they built. And I have read about the choice they made at the end, when they could have continued their conquest, but instead chose to forget everything and start over. He paused, letting his words settle into the silence. They did this because they were horrified by what they had become. They punished themselves with 60,000 years of ignorance, because they believed they did not deserve to remember their power. Pretty words. Kethvari Prime said, but power corrupts. If they remembered their strength once, they will use it again. Better to strike now, while we still have the chance. You don't have the chance. Vesic's voice hardened. I have run every simulation, consulted every tactical expert, analyzed every possible scenario. If we attack, we lose. Completely. Absolutely. Our fleet will be destroyed in minutes, and our homeworlds will be defenseless against any retaliation the humans choose to pursue. Then we negotiate from weakness. We accept their terms because we have no choice. That is not partnership. That is surrender. Is it? Vesic turned to face her directly. They could demand anything. They could demand our territory, our resources, our submission. Instead, they ask only for equality. They offer to share their technology freely, without cost. They promise to help us become stronger, not to keep us weak. He looked around the chamber at the faces of the elder species. In 3,000 years of service to the hegemony, I have never seen a conquered people offer their conquerors gifts. I have never seen a superior power asked to be treated as an equal. What the humans are proposing is unprecedented. It may be the most dangerous thing we have ever faced, or it may be the greatest opportunity. The chamber fell silent. The representatives looked at each other, uncertainty written in their postures and expressions. It was Morith 7 who finally spoke. We must consider what the galaxy will look like in 1,000 years. Regardless of what we decide today, if we fight and lose, humanity will rule alone. If we accept their offer and they betray us, humanity will rule alone. But if we accept their offer and they keep their word, we will have gained allies who can help us face whatever challenges the future brings. You trust them? HFY Prime demanded. I trust their shame. I trust that a species capable of choosing the forgetting is capable of choosing peace. Morith Seven's crystal body brightened with resolve. I propose we accept the human offer, not because we are weak, but because we are wise enough to recognize an opportunity when we see one. The vote that followed was close, closer than any vote in hegemony history. But when the final tallies were counted, the decision was made. The hegemony would accept humanity's offer of partnership. The announcement was broadcast across the galaxy. Species that had watched the standoff with terror and confusion now learned that war had been averted. The humans would not conquer the hegemony. The hegemony would not be destroyed. Instead, something new was beginning, a relationship between powers that had never existed before. Admiral Chen received the news aboard the Memory of Earth. She read the formal acceptance document 3 times before allowing herself to believe it was real. Admiral, Captain Stone said, "What are your orders? Stand down from combat readiness. Begin preparations for the technology transfer we promised, and send a message to President Obi. Tell her it's done. We passed the test." The fleet began to relax around her. Ships that had been ready to unleash destruction now powered down their weapons and opened their communication channels. Crews that had prepared for battle now celebrated their survival. But Chen did not celebrate. She walked alone through the corridors of the Memory of Earth, past displays that showed the history of a species she was only beginning to understand. She stopped at a memorial wall that listed every civilization humanity had destroyed. During the first expansion, thousands of names, thousands of species, billions of lives erased by her ancestors. She placed her hand on the cold metal and felt the weight of that legacy pressing down on her. "We kept our promise," she whispered. "We didn't become what you were." Whether the dead could hear her or not, she didn't know. But it seemed important to say the words anyway. 6 months later, the first exchange programs began. Human scientists traveled to hegemony worlds, sharing knowledge that would have taken millennia to develop independently. Hegemony scholars visited Earth, studying the strange species that had hidden among the stars for so long. The changes came slowly at first, then faster. Medical advances from the human archives cured diseases that had plagued alien species for thousands of years. Energy technology transformed economies that had struggled with scarcity. Knowledge of the universe expanded exponentially as human records filled in gaps that had existed since before the hegemony was founded. But the most important changes were not technological. They were cultural. Species that had lived in fear of each other began to cooperate. Old rivalries faded as the presence of humanity reminded everyone that there were powers in the universe far beyond their petty conflicts. The hegemony itself began to evolve, transforming from an alliance of dominance into something closer to a genuine partnership. Not everyone was happy with these changes. HFY Prime and her allies withdrew from galactic politics, retreating to their homeworlds and refusing to participate in the new order. Other groups formed in opposition, convinced that humanity was playing a long game that would end in conquest. But the majority embraced the new reality. They saw the benefits of human technology, experienced the generosity of human aid, and gradually came to believe that perhaps this unprecedented experiment might actually work. 1 year after the standoff, President Obi addressed the galaxy from the steps of the Human Government Building in Geneva. "We were given a second chance," she said, 60,000 years ago. "Our ancestors looked at what they had become and chose to start over. They gave up everything, their power, their knowledge, their memories, because they believed humanity could be better. Today, I believe we have proven them right." She looked into the cameras that carried her image to 100 worlds. "We will not pretend that the past did not happen. The species we destroyed, the civilizations we erased, the suffering we caused, these things are part of who we are. We carry that burden, and we always will. But we also carry the hope that motivated the forgetting. The belief that change is possible, that power can be used for good, that even the worst among us can choose to become better. Her voice strengthened as she approached her conclusion. The hegemony offered us an ultimatum. They demanded that we submit or be destroyed. Instead, we offered them partnership. We offered them the technology to cure their diseases, to feed their hungry, to power their civilizations. We asked for nothing in return except peace. She smiled, and for a moment she looked like an ordinary woman rather than the leader of humanity. Some call this weakness. They say we should have used our strength to take what